Welcome to Fireside Chats with Brad. I'm so glad you're joining us for what is our 10th episode. In this unique season that's been challenging on many fronts, we've wanted to bring content that is encouraging, inspiring, and helpful to you and your family and your loved ones. Today, we're going to talk about a really important topic of conversation, and that's how do we help our kids navigate this new normal, this new reality we're in called COVID-19 life. I really think the content's going to be gold. We have some fantastic guests. And so if you're watching this on Facebook, we'd love for you to hit that share button and let your friends know about it. If you're viewing this on YouTube, you can do the same. But today, we are really going to drill down on how to help our children. So if you're not a parent, maybe you're an aunt or an uncle or a cousin, a neighbor, or a grandparent, I'd encourage you to tune in because I think this is going to be helpful for everyone. But all of us have had to learn new ways to live life, to navigate these seasons. Some of us have found ourselves at home a lot. For others, maybe the disruption hasn't been as significant. But for kids, depending on their age, they've probably moved to some form of online school. They've missed out on activities with their friends. Maybe their softball seasons got cut short or whatever it may be. This has been a challenging season for them as well. And one of our jobs as parents, as grandparents, as really members of a community is to help our children face these moments and to equip them, because the reality is that life is going to constantly bring new challenges, and our responsibility is to help prepare them for those moments. Now, today, I'm really thrilled to have two special guests on Fireside Chats with me. Joining me today is Lauren Morgan, and I'm going to give you their bios. Lauren is a writer, social media director, Weigel's Coke drinker, big car driver, knower of loss, founder of Project Gabriel, adoptive mama, keeper of her tribe, and wife to Tommy. Welcome, Lauren. Glad to have you on with us today. And then we also have Jessica Nelson. Jessica is a child and adolescent therapist, mom, a boy mom, wife to Stephen, dessert baker, lover of coffee, conversation, and heated blankets, even in the summer. All right, guys, a little follow-up on your bios here. First of all, Lauren, have you been able to access the Weigel's Coke in this kind of shelter-at-home season?
No, and anybody who knows me knows what a huge deal this is. I have not had one Weigel's Coke this entire time since March 13th. That was my last one.
I'm really concerned. I remember it was about a year ago when there was a rumor that they were doing away with styrofoam Cokes. And the cups, the styrofoam cups, are going to switch to the regular paper. And I was concerned for your well-being then. So I'm really concerned now. I hope maybe that some of the restrictions are relaxing, that you can find your way to a Weigel's Coke really soon.
I know, it was crazy when that became not a necessity in my life. I didn't know what had happened. But yes, I mean, as much as I do love the environment, the styrofoam really keeps it cold. So that's kind of a key component.
It does.
But yeah, life is so different these days.
And Jessica, I really think you could get along with my wife. You use a heated blanket in the summer. It drives me nuts. Actually, Julie and I just had an argument about that this week. It was like 82 degrees and she was using the space heater. And I just don't even understand it.
Yeah, this is a constant battle in our house as well. My husband would prefer that things never get above like 65 degrees. And I'm really content at like 70 and above. So the compromise is like we keep the house cool and I just walk around with the heated blanket from room to room.
All right, that seems fair. That seems like you guys really come to a sweet spot. But guys, I'm so glad that you're joining me on this podcast. Both of you have personal experience with children because you're mothers, but both of you have some professional experience in this as well. Lauren, you spend a lot of time writing and cultivating different environments for mothers. And Jessica, you're obviously in the counseling field, working as a child therapist. And so before we kind of jump into the content, let's kind of start from a little bit more of a personal perspective. What's this been like for your families?
For me, it's actually been a really overall good time, a really sweet time. I mean, I don't want to say everything has been perfect. Obviously, we have plenty of challenges. I was telling you guys before we started recording that I have bribed my kids with multiple screens and chocolate to stay out of the room while we do this. So there are definitely challenges and dynamics to this whole, trying to work from home and we're doing distance learning with two of our kids and not the other. And, it has been challenging, but it's been really sweet. It feels like we've been able to get back to the basics a little bit and eliminate our busy schedules. It felt like we were never home. We were always on the go. We had so many appointments and things. And so it's been nice. We've just been able to play and enjoy being with each other. And so overall, just a super sweet time for our family to just be reminded how sweet it is to be together. Now, my kids will break down the door at some point, just to warn everybody. But overall good.
We understand the clock is ticking, and if it happens, it happens, and maybe it'll become a viral sensation and make you famous, more famous than you already are.
We can only hope.
Jessica, what about in the Nelson household?
Yeah, I mean, overall, it's been pretty sweet. My husband and I have both been able to work from home, so we are just all home all the time. Overall, that's been really nice. We, as a family, had a lot of changes in previous years, and so we had kind of committed as a family to try to do less in this year anyway, and then the Lord just brought that to a whole new level of doing less.
Lots of less.
Lots of less. We were like, we knew we needed to slow down. This is a whole new level of slowing down. Kind of like Lauren said, like there have definitely been challenges to that. To everyone being home, I've learned like where in my house I can hide and my children don't find me for a little while. Things. I have a whole new respect for moms who are home all the time with their kids because I'm learning what it's like to not get much of a break. But overall, it's been really sweet. And what has been probably the sweetest thing has been our oldest, who likes a lot of control and a lot of stability, has been so much less anxious during this season. That was really surprising to me. I thought he'd be more anxious, but it's actually been really sweet for him. And so that's been nice.
Well, that's really encouraging to hear. Both of you guys have young kids and they're facing, you've probably been trying to do something to stimulate learning or brain activity at home. I've joked with a few people that I think a lot of parents may have found out in this season that the teacher was not the problem with their kid. They're like, next year's teacher appreciation gifts are going to be like gift cards to Ruth's Chris Steakhouse.
We are so thankful for our teachers. A couple of them have said, we miss your kids so much. We would do anything to have them back. And I'm like, is that true? Because I don't know about that. But yes, teachers are underpaid. Teachers are my heroes. My kids told me on the first day of distance learning that I was the worst teacher ever. It didn't even hurt my feelings because it was true. So we love our teachers around
You just
here.
agree with them and move on.
Yep.
Well, ladies, on the front end, here's what I think we want to clarify. For those tuning in, this is not going to be 7 new things that you need to add to your plate to be a better parent, to somehow or another be an all-star. No one in this season needs another list of things that you should be doing. We've all probably have anxiety for the projects and accomplishments that we were supposed to make, and 7 steps to this and 12 steps to that. But what we are going to talk about are some important things that we can integrate into our everyday life. Things that thoughts, ideas that can help us as we're parenting, whether while we're doing some schoolwork or on a walk with the kids, getting some playtime, breaking bad news, whatever it looks like. We want to talk about some ideas that really came out of a conversation we had a few days ago. And we really come to 3 kind of essential thought ideas that if parents could integrate these 3 ideas, these 3 concepts into everyday life, it would really benefit both them, the parents, but especially their kids. And so, Jessica, I want to start with you. I asked you this question. I asked you and Lauren both this question. So, Jessica, you start, and then Lauren, you chime in. I asked you, what is most important what is the most important things, couple of things for parents to know and understand in this unique season?
Yeah, I think kind of the thing we kind of talked about a few days ago is just that it is a very unique season for all of us, and that also means it is a really unique season for each family. And so that we get into trouble when we start trying to compare between my experience and your experience, because so many families are having such different experiences. Like you said, lots of families are distance learning, but there's also families that aren't. And there are families where both parents are able to work at home. You've got families where parents are having to leave the home and go out because they're essential workers. You have parents who've lost jobs. I've been talking with people who are really worried about, how the finances are all going to add up, in the coming months. And other people who things are doing fine and, like kind of talk about, like, this is a really sweet season. There's people who are anxious just because of the virus in general, and then people who are high risk, who this is a real anxiety and a significant risk. And so I think because our way of connecting is so digital and we are doing so much connecting over social media, it gets so easy to compare, oh, well, they're doing this or they're doing this. And so I think as parents, we can start feeling like, oh man, their kids seem like they're doing great. Jessica just said her oldest is less anxious. Like maybe my kid's supposed to be less anxious. I think that gets us into really dangerous territory because all of our situations are so unique. And so I think, the first thing I would just say is, like, if your kid's doing great, awesome. And if your kids, this is like rocking their world and they're falling apart, that's okay too. And that's totally normal. And I think it's okay if that changes. Like, we were doing great this week and we are totally falling apart now. Because that's just going to happen as things change and as we adjust to this new normal. And then now things are opening back up. And so what does that look like? And so I think we just need to really be careful about not comparing. And then as we also talk about kind of older kids who are on their own social media, and the comparisons they may be having of, oh, my friends are getting to do this and my family's not doing that. And, we already talk about that with adolescents and the comparison that they really look to their peers for what's normal. And right now, nothing's normal. And so I think really being aware not to get into that comparison game.
Man, that's really helpful. I think you mentioned social media there at the end. One of the things social media has done, particularly in this season where lots of life has moved digitally, not just the social media part, but work life has moved socially. And we've got so much more screen time, which is understandable. But social media has always given us the billboard of people's lives and not the diary. Like, we see the 15 best seconds of someone's day, the parents who are able to get their kids to smile for the majestic meadow pose, and you compare that moment, that 15-second billboard, with the entirety of your day, which is ugly, and it tempts us to make comparisons, but we're not making comparisons based on like accurate, meaningful data. We're really making false comparisons in creating false narratives in our minds. That's really helpful to be cautious about comparison and overgeneralizing. Lauren, what do you say to this?
Yeah, I think that's phenomenal because I do that myself. I've looked through social media and seen people who are doing all these experiments or building things with their kids. And we that sidewalk chalk thing that everybody was doing where you tape down geometric pieces and color it and it looks so cool. I'm like, my feed was blown up with that. So I was like, everybody's doing this. I guess we need to do this. So we go out and do it. And what I posted afterwards, I posted a picture of it and I was like, none of y'all told me that you did all of this yourselves.
Exactly.
And your kids did not color all these chalk shapes in, because my kids colored like half of one each and then they were out. And I was like, this has to get finished because we can't just leave it undone. So I'm like, either it's just my kids who are not wanting to participate, or everybody else is making it look real good, even when that's not the case. But, we all tend to do that on social media. And I think talking about comparing, it hits home for me because we have got 2 of my kids have special needs. And so sometimes I look at things or I see friends and even though I said it's going really well, and for our standards it is, and somebody may have heard me at the beginning and been like, well, I wish mine was going well. I'm sick of my people. It's we're all in a different season. And actually that reminds me of a quote that we have talked about before off camera, that someone was saying, we're all in the same storm, but we're in a different boat. So this right now is impacting all of us, but it's different for each of us. So like Jessica had said, one family may be going through the loss of jobs and income and be really tough in that situation. Whereas, like Jessica was saying, she and her husband are able to work from home, and my husband and I are able to as well. And so we don't know what it's like to be in their position. And for our kids who are not, my kids who are not typical, it's different for us being in this environment than it is for friends who may have typical kids, and we can't compare, but it's different for all of us. And even within our house, we've seen a lot of differences. Like for instance, my oldest and my middle, they are in a school where they've been doing distance learning. So we've been doing stuff each day. My youngest is not. And so we just don't do the same. It's different, it's a different standard for how we're doing things. And she also has regressed a lot because she hasn't had her therapies and she hasn't been around her typical peers. And so skills that she had a couple of months ago are kind of long gone. And it's just a different, even within our house, like seeing differences and then seeing it with people, especially on social media. I love social media, and I also hate social media.
Yeah.
There are such good things and such hard things about it.
Well, one of the things that I'm hearing from both of you, kind of a common theme is if we'll take a pause from comparing and overgeneralizing and be a little more thoughtful, it'll lead to empathy. And right now, what families need from us is not so much judgment or evaluation, but empathy.
Absolutely.
So one of the ways that I think we can lead in empathy kind of leads us to number 2 in our 3. So if the first thing that we want to integrate into how we're thinking about our parenting and our kids is, let's be careful not to compare. Let's avoid the comparison trap in the overgeneralization of what's going on. The second thing I think that naturally leads us to in this pathway of empathy is the realization that people have lost a lot in the last couple of weeks. Lauren, you mentioned people who might have lost a job, and there's some significant losses. I've had 2 or 3 people who are friends of mine actually with the virus on the ventilator and in super close to death. Others have lost loved ones, but then there's been death by 1,000 cuts. My daughter was looking forward to softball, and literally as the season was going to begin, it stopped. I've got 2 boys who actually love school and have cried a couple of times because they don't get to see their friends anymore. Several friends who've lost a birthday party. And then I think about your high school seniors who lost prom and graduation. There's been a lot of loss in this. And so, Jessica, grief is actually a part of this journey as well.
Absolutely. And I think anytime we have a transition, we experience grief. So even if it's the end of the school year and we're moving to summer, that in and of itself is a transition, and there's some loss and some grief associated with it. And so I think a lot of times we think of grief as like, oh, I, lost someone I was close to, someone died, or we're having to move. It's this big, huge transition, and we only give ourselves permission to grieve when it's that. And I think the reality is anytime we're making a change, there's some kind of loss, even if it's a change we want to make. And so we have to give ourselves space to grieve. And so in this season where we've had so many changes over and over and over again, the grief just kind of keeps piling on. And so if we don't pause and give ourselves permission to feel that, then it's going to come out sideways. Like we're going to, it's with kids especially, they kind of become more extremes of themselves when they're grieving. So if you have a kid who is more withdrawn, you may find that they're just shutting down even more. And y'all can appreciate my kids running around in the background.
I love it. Real life right there.
Exactly. Or if you've got a kid who tends to be more explosive, maybe you're having more explosions. You're going to see the same in your adolescents. I would expect those like typical adolescent mood swings that are going to happen are going to be more extreme. They're going to happen more often. And that's just part of how we're processing, because our bandwidth for handling and coping with things that don't go our way is a lot smaller when we're grieving. And even little things, like a little loss, can feel really big when we've had all these other losses adding up. And so you may find that your kid, just loses it over not being able to find a toy, and you're like, this is not that big of a deal. But when you add like, well, I, didn't get to end with my classmates this year, and then I'm not getting to see my grandparents, and boom, boom, boom. Well, now I've lost this toy. You've got to be kidding me. Like, I just can't handle another thing.
Yeah. And that's so helpful because, children, frankly, adults aren't always able to process, communicate this well. And it's also difficult for kids. I'm reminded of kind of a story that I tell people that gave me a perspective of how Westerners, Americans in particular, deal with grief. And for those that don't know, I'm an adoptive dad, and I adopted 3 international boys. And they knew very little English when I met them, but they were taught to answer white Westerners when they said, "How are you?" Every kid was taught to say the same phrase, "I'm fine." And so they could have malaria, a broken leg, and be malnourished. "Hello, Cato. How are you?" "I'm fine." And because the expectation is that's what we want to hear. And sometimes we're guilty of doing that. "How are you doing, man?" On the inside, I'm a disaster, but I just say, "I'm fine." Lauren, you've done a lot of work with grieving parents. And so, while you might not be an expert, you certainly have been in this quite a bit. What do you say?
Yeah, so in my organization, it's called Project Gabriel. And so we support women and their families who have lost a baby. And, one of the things we see overall is, as a culture, we don't handle grief well, and we absolutely minimize grief. So one of the things that we, see a lot is we'll have women who will come in and they've lost a baby, maybe through an early miscarriage. And for them, they're like, well, I shouldn't be this upset. I wasn't even that far along, or this person's loss was greater. I get like kind of comparison thing, but we have this notion of not allowing ourselves to feel the depth of that loss and to feel the grief. And that's something that I think we all experience, is this reservation of, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to sit and process your sadness and your loss and your grief. And that's something that we talk about a lot. I talk a lot about that. Now, is it harder to do in my own life? Yeah. And with my kids, like, I still have that tendency to want to fix it and make it better for them and say, this will be okay. It'll be okay. And that's not, I know, like in my head, there are better ways to do that, but it's still trying to work out, how my natural response is to them. But I think early on in this, I think back, and my niece was turning 1. And so we were so excited for her birthday party, and we had to cancel it. And my sister had to cancel it. And she was so sad about it. It was just so disappointing. But then it was also this notion of, well, I shouldn't be that upset because there are people who are sick and are dying, or there are people who have lost jobs. And so I think a lot of people, and I've heard that a lot, like, well, I shouldn't be that upset about not being able to go to prom, or I shouldn't be that upset about preschool graduation or kindergarten tea or whatever kinds of things. But I think and like y'all have said, we need to allow that to happen for our kids and for us to be sad and to process the grief and keep it in perspective. But one of the biggest things that I have learned through my own personal grief of losing a child and walking with people through grief for the last 7 years is that if you don't work through it, it will come back. And like Jessica said, it'll come out in other ways. And that is something that I have seen over and over and over again. And, you know, I've been doing it, like I said, for 7 years. It's not like I've been in this for 30 plus years, but early on, I learned that if you don't deal with it head on, it will come out in some other way.
Man, that's really helpful. I've heard it said, maybe others have, when it comes to grief and these things that kind of stop us, you've got to find it, feel it before you can move on from it. So Lauren or Jessica, either one, like when you're thinking about kids, they might even know the word grief, what that is or what that means. How could parents practically help kids process grief in a very kind of tangible, practical way?
Yeah, I think some of the things, you know, kind of as we talked about this a few days ago, I was really thinking about how do we give some kind of concrete, tangible, easy ideas. One of the biggest ones is just talking about it. I know one thing we've done a lot with my kids, and I've heard other families doing this too, we just talk about what's different. You know, what's something that's different from now than before we started. We use social distancing a lot. Whatever before we were social distancing, what are things like now? What is something good that's happened since we started the social distancing? What's something that's been, you know, because my kids love to talk about like, oh, we get to do this thing, and you know, we baked lots more cookies, and you know, but what's something that's we miss about before social distancing? And so sometimes just leading that in, you're not saying, you know, what are you grieving? What have you lost? Let's have this really intense conversation. It's just kind of a quick like check-in. What are some things that are different? What's been good? Like what's the one thing that's good? What's something we've missed? And then just kind of sitting in that. But we have missed that, and that's hard. I think also for those kids that have, you know, missed out on things like prom or birthdays, finding ways to celebrate that they're not the same. It's not, you know, we're not having prom, so it's not going to be prom. But does that look like still getting dressed up and having a fancy dinner at your house? You know, are there ways to still capture like a small essence of what that was supposed to be? And then also, but not saying, okay, so now we had prom anyway, and it was just as great and it was awesome.
Right.
Giving the space to like, this wasn't what it was supposed to be. And we can be really excited about what we created instead. And we can be really sad that it wasn't what we had intended.
Yeah, that's really helpful. You know, for those who are Christians, followers of Jesus, it doesn't take but a cursory look of the Old Testament, particularly Psalms, Lamentations, Jeremiah. There's a lot of processing and verbalizing of grief and disappointment. And it's actually, it can be a really great way to worship. But Lauren, you do a lot of work with moms. Put you on the spot here. You know, it's one thing to help our kids grieve, but maybe one of the things that causes us to stumble or makes that hard is we haven't necessarily done it or well. Like, can parents, moms, dads, whoever, have permission to also grieve?
Yeah, definitely. I'm obviously not the counselor here like Jessica is, but what I have seen in myself personally is if you don't deal with it yourself, again, same kind of thing, you're not going to be able to help your kids deal with it well either. And so whatever that looks like, whether it is making sure that you're taking good care of yourself, it took me about 3 weeks into this whole social distancing stay at home thing to realize that I needed to shift some better patterns into place in my life. I was not sleeping well. I was staying up late, binging some shows on Netflix. Did I do it again last night? Yes, I did. But it took me a while to realize like I've got to be in a good place myself to help my kids be in a good place. And so making sure that I'm taking time for myself, making sure I'm getting a good amount of sleep, that I'm going outside every day. Like same kinds of things we would do for our kids, right? We need to do them for ourselves as well. And figuring out ways to process through the hard stuff. Because as hard as it is, and I don't have a senior, my oldest is about to turn 9, but I imagine as hard as it is for the seniors to lose all of this end of year senior stuff, the moms, it has got to be breaking their hearts for their kids and everything that they've put into it. I can't imagine that they don't get to see their kids walk the stage and, all those big things that they look forward to too. So I think you've got to be able to have space yourself to process it.
That's really good. We're talking about some really serious stuff. Quick parentheses. Lauren, what have you been binge watching on Netflix?
So many things. Listen, I've gone back and forth between Netflix and Hulu, and there's some quality programming out there. I'll just send you a list of what I've been on, but there's some good stuff and some old stuff, mix it up.
Jess, do you have a favorite show that maybe you've indulged in during this season?
Oh, way too many. Like, it's embarrassing to list the number of shows that I started and then finished, and I'm like, oh, see, because Steven my husband, is not a big binge watcher, and so he'll be like, so how's the show going? And I was like, oh, I finished that whole all 5 seasons of it, and now I've started this new one.
You're one of the watch ahead spouses.
I'm a watch ahead spouse too.
Oh man, I can't afford to do that in my household. Matter of fact, one particular point in time, my wife was out of town for a couple of days, and she sent me a text that said, "If you watch episodes of whatever the show was, I will kill you." It was just forbidden. But I've spent a lot of time going back to the 90s and watching lots of Frasier, because I thought if I'm going to be quarantined, I would want to live in his Seattle apartment.
It's a good place. Yeah, you can't beat that. I also think Frasier is a good choice because he's got that background, It's got to give you a little bit of an edge when you're maybe doing some counseling or some pastoral care.
Yeah. Except he needed more counseling than any of his patients. Anyways.
No, I have been introducing my kids to 90s movies, and that's been so fun.
That's awesome. I tried to introduce my daughter to MacGyver, which was my favorite 80s show, and nostalgia is powerful. That show felt a lot better when I was 9 years old than it did. I'm pretty sure it was shot on a Walmart bought JVC camcorder. It was tough. All right, I'm going to bring it back to where we're going. So third piece here, avoid overgeneralizing, give your kids permission to grieve. And then one of the things that you guys said, and we'll kind of bring this to kind of the wrap up, is this season has been challenging in a number of ways, and everyone just needs a little bit of grace.
Yes, so much grace. I think like Jessica had said earlier, kids, they are becoming heightened versions of themselves, whatever that looks like. And so my oldest, who's an introvert, who feels safe being home, doesn't want to go for a car ride now. He's like, nope, I don't even want to get in the car. I'm fine to stay home. So, I'm seeing that at home, but grace with my kids, grace with other people. It doesn't take more than a 10-second scroll through your Facebook to see that there's a lack of grace going around, and that we all need to just take a deep breath in how we're responding to people, especially when they have different opinions from us. And, I say that I need to practice that too, for sure. I am not the best at that, but we definitely need to be gracious.
Jessica, the word grace, or give people grace, it's a beautiful thing, but it can also be a little bit nebulous. Bring that down to earth. What would it look like to give your kids a bit of grace in this season?
Yeah, so I think one of the things, and I think this is important in any season, but especially in this one, is just being slow to punish. I have people in my office, kind of one of the biggest questions people ask, what's the right consequence? If I can just know the magic consequence, then I can stop my kid's behavior and things will be better. And that's not really ever helpful, unfortunately. I wish there was a magic consequence. I just got
really disappointed. I did this whole entire chat to get to this moment. What's the magic sauce to get my kids to just be perfect?
I wish I had it. Unfortunately, I don't. But I think, especially in this season, when you see your kid, being anxious about getting in the car or exploding over a toy or, rolling their eyes as dramatically as possible. Not that you ignore it, because we're not just ignore our kids' behavior, but this isn't the time to be harping on like every little detail. And the other thing is, like, we're home, at least in my house, like we're home with them all the time. So they don't even have the luxury of like, we didn't notice something. Like,
exactly. That's exactly right. Julie and I were talking the other day. I'm like, the reason the kids keep getting in trouble is because they're here an extra 8 hours a day. The opportunity is just there.
Absolutely. Whereas like normally they'd be in school and you wouldn't know about it. So I think sometimes maybe it is just, if it's not that big of a deal, just choosing to ignore it. And then if it is something that's a pattern or it's a bigger deal, kind of going in and saying like, hey, that's not okay. And I expect something different. Here's the expectation. And then just kind of rolling with it. And maybe that's coming around later and saying like, hey, I noticed you have been rolling your eyes like crazy all day. What's going on? Like, this isn't normal for you. Because oftentimes our kids want to do the right thing. There's something else going on that's causing them to do something different. And so trying to get at that emotion that's underneath. And then it can be hard.
That's really good.
Yeah, that's great.
When things are out of control, when things are out of our control, we sometimes lose control of our emotions. One thing that I found a little bit concerning is I've seen a couple of instances where 12-year-olds, 14-year-olds are having to be the comforters and anxiety reducers for their parents. And like that shouldn't be their job. In almost every instance I've observed that, it's because the adult, they're not able to control the situation. A doctor's office visit is taking longer than it used to. Well, of course it is. The to-go food wasn't prepared as timely. Well, of course not. The kitchens are maxed out. That if we can all be a little bit more gracious to those around us, but also to ourselves. I've probably listened to Andrew Peterson's Be Kind to Yourself 25 times in the last month. And just as a reminder that, hey, we all just need to be a little patient, more patient, maybe kind of for those of us who tend to be a little bit more controlling or like structure, we might have to just kind of take our hands off the controls a little bit.
Well, and I think, speaking to that as adults, we want to help our kids regulate, not the other way around. And so anyone who knows me, y'all, I love control. I love having all my boxes in a row and checked and ordered, and that makes me feel safe and comfortable, and this is not that season. And so I think it's knowing, what do I need to feel okay so that I can be patient with my kids. So maybe that's, like Lauren said, like going outside and just getting some vitamin D or going on a walk. Moving our bodies is such a great way to help ourselves regulate when those emotions get high. Mm-hmm. We totally been known to, like, myself, my 5-year-old, my 1-year-old, like, we are all maxing out, like the emotions are high. And so we just blast Baby Shark and dance around the house. And it's been super helpful. We go crazy, but it helps us kind of, now we're being silly, now we're moving our body, and then we can come back. So Baby Shark is my sanity these days.
There you heard it, everyone. Just use Baby Shark. Well, guys, 3 things. Let's be careful not to overgeneralize and compare. Let's give people permission to grieve, and then let's extend grace. And we can do all 3 of those things. Any final words before we sign off here?
I just love, it's encouraging for me to hear, the things you have to say, Jessica. I think it's so helpful because I worry, am I doing this right? Am I messing this up? We're with our kids so much right now, and I think there's so much to be worried about. And sometimes I'm like, well, maybe I'm not worried enough. I'm not worried right now. Maybe I'm not worried enough. And like you said, there are some days where, or some weeks that are great weeks and the next week is not. And today, I was feeling so stressed out earlier today, and just a lot of, like, I couldn't even identify it. Like, I was like, I don't think anything's different today necessarily than anything else, but I was just feeling the stress, and I was not connecting well. So it's been good to get to hear what Jessica's had to say. And I think, I was thinking the thing that we try to do is take our kids with us in the everyday thing. And so, in that grief piece, you had said something, Brad, about kids may not know what grief is or be familiar with the word grief. And, my kids they've lost a sibling, and I don't know if my kids know what the word grief means, but they know what grief is. We talk about around grief and things like that. And like Jessica was saying about how you would talk about it and talk about the highs and the lows. And actually yesterday would have been my son's 7th birthday, my son who passed away. And so we went to the cemetery and we took balloons and put it on his grave and that kind of thing. And for my kids, that's kind of what we try to do always, is just, this is how we walk this out and this is how we live it. And so thinking about that and applying it to Corona time, like just being open with how we're talking and how we're feeling and the uncertainties. Like, I hate to tell my kids, I don't know what next year's going to look like for you. I wish I knew. And I like to be in control too, like you said, Jessica, but we're all kind of in this together. And I think having that mindset has been helpful. I don't get it right a lot. I get it wrong a lot, but it's just been encouraging, I think, to hear the things you've had to share, Jessica.
That's great. Any last word, Jessica?
Yeah, I think I wanted to kind of circle back. We had talked about kids comforting parents and that kind of piece. And I want to be just careful to make sure we're being clear that, like, it's okay as parents to talk to our kids about what we're struggling with. So that there's a difference in, I'm so anxious, I need you to comfort me. And, hey, I'm talking to you about the fact that I feel really worried too, that I don't know what's coming next. And so I think that gives us an opportunity to connect with our kids and to say, I think we make our kids feel really alone if they're the only ones feeling anxious. And we're like, I got this. I'm not worried. Because either they think, oh, there's something wrong with me that I feel worried about this. Or, like, my parent is clueless because this is really scary. And, like, they don't know it's scary. And so it's okay for us to say, like, I really worry about this too. Like Lauren was sharing, like, sharing in our grief. Like, I'm really sad about this too. And all those unknowns, and I think just sitting with that, and then also helping our kids, especially for those kids that like the control, naming what are the things we do know. Like, we don't know what school's going to look like, but we know we're going to do some kind of learning. And we don't know if we're going to get together with our friends, but we know that we can still FaceTime them. Kind of pulling back to the things we do know, because that can be really comforting when we have all these unknowns.
That's great. When there's uncertainty, we might not know all the answers, but we can bring a sense of clarity. That's what I hear you saying, Jess. Love that. One of the best definitions of leadership I've ever heard is the best leader embodies what they're calling others to follow. And what you guys are both saying is, as parents, if we'll lead in this way, it'll actually give our kids permission and a pathway to follow. Lauren, if people wanted to hear more from you, you're a podcaster, a writer, where can they find you in the digital space?
Yeah, I have my feet in too many places. I'm one of those kind of jacks of all trades, master of none. But I actually help run the social media at Fellowship Church at Middlebrook, and I'm really proud of the stuff that we put out on there. We like to try to encourage and uplift people, so that's always a good place where I like to send people. And then I have the privilege of doing a podcast there with Rick Dunn. It's called Life Reframed, and it can be found at your favorite podcast player. You can find me online on Facebook, Instagram, Lauren G. Morgan, and Project Gabriel is the nonprofit sphere of my life.
Jessica, how can people hear more from you, or if parents have a child that they'd want to maybe consider some resources for, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am also on Facebook. I've got Jessica Nelson Counseling Facebook page, and I post different kind of resources for parents, just thinking about parenting tips and things I find helpful in my and as a parent. And if you're looking for more, whether that's just a consultation to know if counseling is a good fit for your child or adolescent, or if you think it really is time and we, want to have that, absolutely can. I'm with Restoration Counseling Associates, and so you can find us at restorationcounselingassociates.com.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to have all the links to that information in the show description on YouTube and in the comments here on Facebook. Lauren, Jessica, thanks for joining me today. You guys were a tremendous help to so many people. Once again, appreciate you listening and tuning in to Fireside Chats with Brad. Again, check on all of our previous episodes. We've talked about a lot of different things, whether you're working from home or trying to figure out how to help your at-risk parents. Lots of conversations and topics there. And until we see you the next time, take care.